Great, they're doing great. They were up for Dawn Memorial last week, back down in the States, but they'll be up for the summer here shortly. So how do you want to set us up?
All right.
Why don't you sit wherever you're comfortable?
Right, that was
Yeah,
a
very impressive.
stupendous thing.
Call. Without you, we couldn't have done it. You want to sit here?
Welcome.
Just
All
a quick
right.
sip of water.
So I'm gonna have you share. Are you this mic, and then I will share a mic with you, Joe, if that's okay.
You bet.
Hello, everybody. I know a number of people are going to join us throughout this conversation, but I wanted to welcome to the stage again, Rick Minnich, the director of the Strait Guys. What a compelling story we have just seen. Welcome back.
Thanks.
And then joining us, we have Brian Murkowski, energy consultant and president of Brian Murkowski Energy Consulting, LLC.
That's correct.
Right? To join us on this global perspective, and the very one and only Joe Henri, who appeared in this film. Hi, Joe.
Thank you so much. I'd like to thank Rick Minnich especially for the stupendous job he did at producing the film.
I have to thank Joe, because without Joe, I wouldn't be here. So,
I actually have to agree, and I feel like we should just open up this conversation, and I would like to get the conversation started, and then I'm going to take questions from the audience. But I kind of just want to acknowledge that this is a kind of a big story that started in a different context and is now being shown in another one. And so kind of from all of your perspectives, what was your first impression of this film and maybe this idea at large?
Well, speaking for myself, is that what I was supposed to be doing?
Yeah.
Rick showed it's a fabulous, tremendous project. And there weren't too many Chinese, but I think China is essential for the success because they have the goods that are coming to Edmonton and for distribution in North America. So we have to get the Chinese heavily involved in wanting to use the railroad and produce it. I think that's the biggest thing. Plus, getting over the little problem with the Russians, some of the Russians these days.
So you're saying the project still has legs, Rick?
I think so.
Okay, Rick, seeing this on the screen.
well, this is the first time I've seen it with an audience since we did a test screening well over a year ago. So we had the world premiere was in Brazil a week ago at it's the largest documentary film festival in Latin America, and kind of a strange place for a premiere, but they were the first ones who said they wanted the film. So we went with it, and I was there in 2009 with another film. I have a nice relationship with the people there. They asked us if we wanted to withdraw the film and rework it in light of what's going on in Ukraine, and he said maybe we should add an extra title card at the end to make some reference to it, and that's what we ended up doing. And because as horrible as this war is, and as much as I absolutely condemn the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I think if you look at the 150-year-long perspective of the timeline this idea has been floating around, I think it's probably just one of a blip, one of these many wars that have gotten in the way. So I'm hoping that people who see this film can look beyond the current situation and can focus on how much the United States and Russia actually have in common, and how many common interests we have and how we are way better when we cooperate, as we've seen with the International Space Station, for instance, which is a fantastic US-Russian success story in my eyes. Brian?
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I'd just like to say it was a fantastic movie. You really did a nice job, very compelling. All of the actors and players are very compelling, and I thought you told a very nice story. And in terms of the project, you know, I'm a believer in big things, and I've always felt that eventually, someday, this will get built. But I'm also, you know, I have an economics background and have to believe that things like this get built when the economics drive it. And I actually do see some positives, you know, at this time and place that include, for instance, the development of renewable energy and electric vehicles and that new coming revolution. Those require enormous amounts of minerals that currently aren't, for instance, being developed here in North America or are slowly coming online, but require a great deal of logistics. And I can certainly see as the North American economy evolves in that direction with those newer technologies, the demand for raw resources grows, and Russia is a natural provider of so much of those minerals. I can see the economics start to drive, you know, each week, each month. Particularly, you know, you look at the nickel prices. We saw about 3 weeks ago, trading was suspended because the demand drove nickel prices up 1,000%. So these are some of the things that are required to be a tipping point to get projects like this done. I have a background in Asian finance. I worked overseas in Tokyo for many years. I worked in Europe, and I've seen how big projects, infrastructure projects get put together, and it starts with precisely this kind of vision and passion, and frankly, unfortunately, people having to put themselves out there, sometimes their own money, and sometimes they don't realize it because, you know, their time has passed. But we'll see. I think this has legs. It may not be tomorrow, but I think in the coming years it'll get more attention.
That's a lot of great points there. In fact, maybe just continuing on that trend in thinking the global importance of a project like this. Could you speak to a little bit about how the Intercontinental Railway could contribute to greater energy security in Alaska and the lower 48, and how it can contribute to boosting energy exports from Alaska?
Sure. Well, we actually touched on this a few minutes ago before the movie, but Alaska, as many of us are aware, is really the logistical center of the universe. We are equidistant between Anchorage and Tokyo, Anchorage, San Francisco, Anchorage, Iceland, Anchorage, London. We're right in the center of it. And with the opening of Arctic shipping, you know, we're going to see ourselves at more of a player. But from a rail perspective and from a mineral perspective, you know, we've talked, some of you may be aware of the A2A project that was being pushed by Mead Treadwell that envisioned moving 1.5 million barrels of Canadian bitumen from Fort McMurray to Alaska for export to Asia. And, you know, that project has had a few setbacks, but it's still a viable alternative. And Paul Metz, who's our chief geologist at University of Alaska Fairbanks, has done an analysis of the mineral potential on a 50-mile north-south kind of corridor going between Fairbanks and Fort McMurray, and they've identified in 2008 something close to $800 billion worth of economically recoverable minerals that could be produced and either exported to the lower 48 or to, you know, Alaska for processing, or to Canada, or to Asia. So just in that short, you know, 1,000-mile stretch, we're talking about some of the richest potential mineral development. And again, these are minerals that are utterly required for the United States to transition into this new clean energy economy. So, you'll see both sides of the aisle, or I should say both political persuasions interested in this kind of economic development, because you're talking about realizing the dream of the green community by providing these rare earth minerals for that kind of technology, but also for on perhaps the pro-development side, the realization and the revenues of producing minerals and resources. And then certainly, as I alluded to before, any kind of transportation corridor, new transportation corridor that can be opened up between Asia and the North America is absolutely critical. We saw, just in the last few months, the supply chain logistics that were effectively shut down as a result of COVID and the backups. But we were seeing vessels waiting weeks, in some cases off of Long Beach or San Francisco or Portland or Shanghai, because they didn't have enough infrastructure. And so there is a compelling argument for rail, for new corridors, connecting Asia and North America.
I should point out at this point that we filmed with Brian back then, and unfortunately, not everyone can make it in the film, but as you see, he knows what he's talking about. And he's been very helpful to us along the way, so I'm glad you're here.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Well, I think a lot of the power of this film is that you have a lot of really important players that do show up and give commentary or play a role in the story. And as Brian, you've pointed out that a lot of the potential of things, these ideas, they have momentum when they have a lot of potential, and then they gain momentum when they get people behind them and support. But sometimes those big conceptual things are outside of the reach of, or understanding of a lot of people on the ground, or regular citizens, if you will. And I liked how this film really tried to feel out and have conversations with people who would be directly affected in their home or their villages, or just even in their pockets of what this potential project could be. Now, as you two have been very integral in talking to all levels of the citizenry about this project, what do you think is the general consensus of a project like this? Is it really does it make people really excited, or is it a mixed bag?
Want to say anything, Joe?
I would like to say something, but to answer your question, which I'm sure is required, I don't know about the average person or what they're thinking at all. There are very few people who even think of the Alaska Railroad, that we've got. Some poor woman was killed with her dog the other day down towards Seward. But we don't think much about the railroad. But this project that Rick has filmed and stimulated, one of the great things about it for Alaska right now is the possibility of having cheaper renewable energy. It's amazing, Rick, I don't know whether you picked that up or not, that except for Hawaii, Alaska is the most expensive electricity in the United States. It's truly amazing, and this rail is scheduled to be a electric traction, and that means, I believe, giant hydroelectric projects and tidal projects, which are available in both sides of the Bering Strait. Now, of course, we can easily stumble and annihilate ourselves with the concern for environmental destruction of some sort. But I think we went, many years ago, Aletha and I and our family went to the Barrage de Lorance in Normandy that de Gaulle had built, and he was one determined man, you know, and he, it's a very, very pleasant place. We were over there in the summertime, so boats are able to do it as well as the tidal energy generated there. But I hope, Brian, too, that with your family connections, we could enjoy low-cost electricity and plentiful electricity instead of the second highest in the United States, which we have now. It's really regrettable.
Makes a good point.
Well, and to your point about how is it, maybe you can repeat the question a little bit, but it was to how people are responding, how they're viewing it, is it getting...
Yeah, or rather, thinking about this as a big project, and like some of the, you know, obstacles can be kind of moved out of the way when you have public support, and then it gains momentum, right?
Yeah.
And so, where do you think that we're at? Maybe this is for everyone. Where do you think we're at in this project? Say we had all green lights for the actual infrastructure. Do you think the public is excited for this, or we're a little hesitant? What? I don't know. It could go any direction.
My personal impression is look, if this project were financed, if you had you know compelling arguments, economic arguments for it, which there are, people would get behind it. I think again, big ideas sometimes take time, but and you have to build consensus. But I think for you know, transforming, honestly, this part of the world, rail could play an enormously important role. You know, we just you look at we have no infrastructure moving west of Fairbanks, essentially. We have no roads, we have no rail, we have you know, intermittent aviation connection, and part of that is by design. I mean, during the D2 land selection, the federal government purposely selected you know, a corridor that effectively prevented infrastructure to move west of Fairbanks. But I think from a you know, local perspective, from a Canadian perspective, and certainly from a Russian perspective, the stakeholders, the people that live in that region, only see upside and only see benefit. So, you know, I think there will always be opposition to any kind of development, particularly in a pristine area like we're living in. But to Joe's point, you know, I think that we, at least in Alaska, we're capable of doing things better, cleaner, more efficiently in an Arctic environment than anyone else, and we could do this kind of project. And I actually have, you know, you mentioned I have a little consulting business, and I do. One of my clients is one of the world's largest tidal power producers, and we're actually putting a 100 megawatt project in Cook Inlet, or at least intend to over the next decade. So to your point, you know, clean energy, something like a you know, a clean energy powered rail system certainly would gain more fans because of its you know, acceptance and responsibility to the environment. And then you know, you talk about potential stakeholders in a place like Wales or Diomede. You know, we have to be very careful about impacting their tradition But I think that Joe and Rick and others have made a concerted effort to include, the opinions of the peoples who would be impacted by this, and let them weigh for themselves as to whether or not this would be good for their communities. But I think that the takeaway from everyone that you probably met is let's take a look at this. This could be a game changer for us, but in a good way. As long as we take it step by step.
It was part of our plan from the beginning when I was planning this big trip with Scott Spencer to make a point of visiting all of the villages along the way that would be along the route. And so namely Wales and Mead would be the ones most impacted by this project in Canada. And because Scott's worked on a lot of mega projects around the world and has observed that it's really important to take the time to speak to local communities before construction begins, before all the decisions are being made, to get their input, rather than just saying, this is going to be done. So the opinion was pretty divided. Some people were quite shocked by the idea. As you see in the film, there are local women, indigenous women, they had very basic, understandable concerns about what happens to their picking areas and things. And because they saw an artist rendering in it, which makes it look like the tunnel portal would be very close to the ocean, so there are a lot of concerns. It just takes some time to explain to these people that this is a sketch, basically. This is how it could look or how it could be, but when it gets down to the actual engineering of it, there's a certain amount of flexibility involved. So we just really wanted to get their feedback. And we also did what's not in the film. There was a lot of things that are not in the film. We had meetings with the CEO of the Doyon Corporation and of the Bering Straits Native Corporation. So these are the two native corporations where the railroad would go through all the way across Canada. It was important for us that they understood that we were taking this trip and to get their feedback. And they were fairly open-minded about it. And they actually said it would be that the native population would prefer a railroad going through rather than a road, because people wouldn't be getting on and off along the way. It would just go straight through. With a road, they're more concerned that people will stop and, I don't know, do stupid things out in nature and destroy it and stuff like that. So that was kind of, that opinion. When I just pitched this project, actually, when we were trying to raise money, for instance, I always traveled around with an inflatable globe, like a little beach ball, that I found very helpful to actually show people why this makes sense, to show them the curvature of the earth and how, like, there's a shot early in the film of Joe with a string on his globe at home showing the route. And what we don't see in the film is that he took that same piece of string and he also lowered it to show the distance going across the Pacific Ocean, like what the shipping lane is. And we see that that's much further than the railroad would be. And trains go much faster than ships. So that's why the projections are that it would take 1 week less to go, that the train would be 1 week faster to go from Asia to North America than the ships are.
And it's considerably significant, that difference, and not only in time, but also in energy costs and that kind of thing. And then what we experience on the other end of those goods and services and that kind of thing. Something we touched on before was that up here in Alaska, we know where we sit, and sometimes that feels really far away from, say, Washington. We're part of the United States, but not the contiguous United States. And then even Russia is, those who are very close to our border are very far away from Moscow. And so we might even have more in common with our partners across the Bering Strait than our counterparts across the Bering Strait. We probably have similar feelings, and we can even separate people from politics and stuff. But in a general way, because of our very northern space, our geographic location, we're a cargo hub, major cargo hub. We are a strategic military base, right, or site for the United States. And then with the projection that we're going to start seeing ice-free summers up on our northern coastline, that, we could start seeing a lot more travel and shipping and that kind of thing. In that regard, we know that we're very integral in this, that the United States and transit, if you will. Do you think, and maybe this goes for Brian and Joe, that we in Alaska, are we ready for this an intercontinental railway? And or do you think that could actually, give me your thoughts on that, I'm kind of curious.
Brian?
Sure. Yes, I think we're ready for it when it comes, but I think it'll, and this is just my personal view, I think it'll happen in smaller increments to us up here. For instance, the missile defense facility at Fort Greely, there is supposedly Department of Defense money available to extend that rail from North Pole to Delta Junction. So perhaps the Department of Defense finances or builds that section. Perhaps mining interests it'd be primarily mining interests would like to see rail extended to the Canadian border because of the vast potential for resource development along that corridor. Maybe that gets built next. Maybe the Ambler Road that some folks are talking about going from the Hall Road to effectively south of the Brooks Range, but near to the kind of the same path that they're talking about. Perhaps that gets turned into a railroad rather than a road, because a lot of the local communities that are on that road feel that a road would allow hunting. I think that's primarily the biggest concern. So maybe a railroad becomes more palatable. But perhaps that's how it gets the financing, and it gets to be part of a bigger vision of a continental connecting route, to Russia. I don't know that, but I see, in conversations daily around Anchorage that people would be interested in those projects and those kinds of things, and I could see those being those kinds of things being leveraged into a larger project potentially.
But I'd like to join on that a little bit about what Alaskans are ready for and what they think about this. I find in my long life in Alaska now that there are a lot of very bright people here, not scumbags by any means, but there are a lot of brightness, creativity and whatnot. But very few are have a huge vision of what Alaska could do. Very few. And I think some of them are careful that they don't want Alaska to be a big industrial place. They like the rural aspect of Alaska, and for a lot of people, Anchorage is too big, So I think the politicians have a trouble. It's the people who rule, right? And if the politician gets too far flung, he's ousted in favor of somebody who's more homespun or humble or whatever. So I personally think that politicians in Alaska should be educating people. And a very good element is cheaper electricity. I just can't get over how expensive it is And it's going to remain that way unless we decide to do something very dynamic here.
Brian's working on that with the
That's
tidal
good.
plant.
Yeah, the tidal. That's great. So,
I think it's important if we look back in history, go back to the 19th century, that if you look at the development of the United States, it was really largely, the Western United States was really developed largely as a result of the Transcontinental Railway. And if you look at our neighbor to the west, Russia, the Russian Far East was really developed by the Trans-Siberian Railway, and in the 1970s extended through the northern extension of Baikal-Amur main line. And I think the Intercontinental Railway is the logical extension, the connection that would connect the two systems. And maybe this is, with this push towards renewable energy, actually maybe the pieces can kind of come together, because this would be a green system, electric traction railroad powered by renewable energy sources. I think those are some things going in its favor. And the Russians, what we experienced while we were there, I took multiple trips to Russia, and Victor, your straight guy fellow, your Russian straight guy partner, is a very well-connected man. So we were meeting quite high up people, as you see in the film. They have a long-term, like the Chinese, they have long-term strategic plans, which I think, because of the election cycles in the US, it's very difficult to have these long-term strategic plans here. So they recognize the importance of getting to the mineral riches in the Russian Far East, and they're going to do it anyway, even if this intercontinental railway doesn't happen. It's just that was one of these conflict moments where George got very upset when we were in Yakutsk, and the Yakutian Railways people had told us that they were going to do a different route than George had planned, because that was where the minerals are that they wanted to get to. I'm just wanting to point out this difference in the political systems between the United States and Russia, and how that has an impact on these large projects.
If I could just add one more thing, the city of Nome got $250 million in the latest infrastructure bill, and that's to improve the port. And you start adding infrastructure along the route that you're kind of proposing, you get more need for your kind of project. Whether it's moving all the steel that's going to be required for improving the port of Nome, and obviously you wouldn't build the railroad before you fund Nome, but I'm just talking to the idea that as Alaska matures and we perhaps develop more of our Bering Sea communities with the opening of the Arctic and the increase in vessel traffic and the potential for military growth and for resource development, Alaska will need better logistics, and maybe you get enough economic impetus and enough industries demanding alternative logistical routes. That's what that's again the tipping point that pushes a project like this along.
That's the magic word, intermodal transportation there with the Port of Nome. Then it really would make sense if there were a railroad, if ships could be unloaded in Nome and things could be put on.
And you brought up an interesting point a minute ago about energy prices in western Alaska, for instance. In Anchorage here, we probably pay, don't quote me on this, but the equivalent of maybe 15 cents a kilowatt hour. 20 cents a kilowatt hour. Up in a place like Point Lay, you're paying 80 cents a kilowatt hour. And that's just that's not fair. It's not sustainable. It's not right. But that's the only choice they have. Is to move diesel from Cook Inlet all the way around the Alaska Peninsula and up the coast. If you had a rail connection to Nome, perhaps those folks would benefit substantially in terms of just energy and other things that inflation is impacting, food and all of that. So.
I see that Mead Treadwell has shown up. Do you want to say anything, Mead?
Yeah, excellent. I'm gonna give you the mic. Here, take my seat.
No, that's okay.
Because then I can go see if there's any questions in the audience. But
Should I take your mic
yeah,
too?
go for it. Sit down. Yeah.
First off, I'm sorry I'm late. I don't know how I got double booked on a beautiful Saturday afternoon.
Because you wanted to sit in the dark with us here.
That's cool. And congratulations on the movie, and congratulations, Strait Guy,
Yeah.
for all you've done. We just got through, I don't know how many of you were at the Arctic conference that concluded last night. But in the end, the last panels were, how do we have Arctic cooperation without Russia? Senator Murkowski made a statement that was retweeted by former President Grimson this morning that said, we can't let the absence of Russia stop Arctic cooperation. But there was one thing really kind of missing from the discussion, and I say this not to be a downer on the concept of the Intercontinental Railroad, which I think is a very, very important concept. But we had the leading security people in the Arctic and the leading diplomats in the Arctic, and there were no discussions on the stages on how to make sure that Russia might not snap back with the funding that they're earning from the Arctic to support their war machine. And if you take a look at the source of Putin's economic power, it's gas from Yamal that goes into Europe in spades, but also into Asia in spades. And in the margins of the discussion with the Japanese ambassador, they have not figured out how to unwind from a commitment in Asia of almost 40 million tons a year, a huge amount. 2 full Alaska gas pipelines of LNG. And it's not just Japan, it's Japan, Korea, China, and even a little bit Taiwan. When it comes to overflights, we have stopped overflights over Russia, but those will probably snap back if things slow down, so it'll fund a war machine again. And that's $500 million a year or more. Fishing. We know the structure of fishing in our side of the Bering Sea, our side of the North Pacific, and the riches, which are to the tune of billions of dollars a year, are gained by the Russians there in selling into Asian markets. And there's probably no legal way for us to stop that, except maybe with moratorium and buying. And then the Russians claim to have the monopoly on ship services, and their business plan, which is quite public, expects revenues within 10 years of about $1 billion a year from diverting cargoes from the Suez to that area. Now, 3 months ago, if I were sitting here and we had filmed this, shown this film then, I would have said those are all positive economics that support the argument for an intercontinental railroad, because a railroad like this will need probably $6 to $9 billion in revenue to defease its construction costs. And I think the 4 of us up here and those of you sitting there could probably construct, based on not very large extensions of economic activity in both countries or even on both continents, that kind of revenue that would support transportation, that would support a railroad like this. And the biggest question today is, would we want to? Would we find it in our geopolitical interests to do that today? Would we find it in our moral interests to do that today? My first major discussion on this railroad was on a trip that I made with Governor Wally Hickel in 1981 across Russia as guest of the Politburo. At the time, Ronald Reagan was calling the Russians an evil empire. And I left that trip, which was an amazing trip. Actually, we visited the BAM Railroad extension. We talked to the Yakutsk. We went to Yakutsk. We talked to the Yakutsk Railroad people who were doing the expansion there. I later went back with Brian's father on the first flight that crossed the border between the U.S. and Russia, and ultimately with Magadan, with Chukotka, with Kolyma, with Yakutia. We looked at ways to see that that railroad is coming close, and yes, I've had the opportunity to meet Razbagin several times. It should happen for world peace. It should happen for completing the basic infrastructure of the planet. But the biggest question in my mind today is, how do you rehabilitate a country that has taken internal kleptomania and turned it into external horror, violence, and kleptomania? Because for the last, and really since your dad and I made that trip, since, and many other Alaskans, since we did that in the 80s, we had such hope, and still should have such hope. There are thousands of Russian, American children and grandchildren living here in Anchorage. We have, on aviation, we used to, worry about what happened to KL-007, and now if I fly to Asia, most of it is over Russia. If I fly to Dubai, most of it is over Russia, but not anymore. And I think what we have to hold out for is this: there will be a time when the war criminals will have been prosecuted, when the absolute horror will have been vanquished somehow with full respect to the families who've lost people, and you cannot vanquish that. And then there will be a time for confidence building measures and economic measures, and maybe we'll do it right again. And so, as Governor Hickel used to say, it may not happen in my lifetime, but we should never stop talking about it. I always thought, no, gosh, we're going to make it happen in my lifetime. And Joe, I still want to see it happen in your lifetime. But boy, oh boy, am I in a box. I haven't the faintest idea how we're going to get there, but God bless.
I, as the non-Alaskan here, am kind of optimistic that you Alaskans can, with your close connection to Chukotka, can maybe find a way to keep the ball rolling, maybe from the outskirts, and work your way towards Washington and Moscow. Maybe there's I don't know, there are these meetings at the Arctic Conference at the mayor level, and there seems to be like some cooperation going on at a lower level. I don't know. I mean, the thing that no one was talking about at the conference was really there's a need for a regime change in Russia, obviously. And no one would say it directly, but it seems to me that it's going to take a major change to get us to a position where some kind of cooperation like this was possible.
Well, I guess I put it this way: not a dime of U.S. investment, not a dime of foreign investment should be going into Russia until the killing stops and the criminals are dealt with.
Yeah, I absolutely agree.
Okay?
Yeah.
Now, in the meantime, I have friends in Russia who've written me emails apologetic about what's happened. I have friends who have immigrated from Russia who are feeling that people are blaming them unfairly, and I agree, it is unfair. And as was said last night at the conference, this war will stop when mothers on both sides, insist that it must stop. I will say to the Alaskans who are from Russia and Alaskans from Ukraine who have family ties across the border, just remind them that we love them as people. May not love their government, may not love the madman in office, but there is that opportunity. It's about the only thing I think we can do right now. But I do think it does make sense for us to understand the economics of the Russian Arctic, because if you want to know where their money comes from, that's where.
I would agree with you completely as well, and I think when I think about this project, I'm looking at it beyond Putin, beyond this current cabal that's running the country, and I'm optimistic that someday there will be a change. You know, that's not the only problem or issue that, you know, could change the dynamics of global trade demand. You know, we're seeing the demographics, frankly, of Russia and China, and particularly China, where, you know, the one-child policy is creating a situation where by 2015, the population of China will be roughly half of what it is today. You're looking at a collapse of the Russian demographic where, you know, following the fall of the Soviet Union, people stopped having, you know, multiple children, and now the Russians have maybe a couple-year window where they still have enough draftees to conduct a war like they're trying to conduct in Ukraine, and may have to conduct, you know, in the Baltics and in Poland. So there's and I would add, you know, with regard to China, I've just heard recently that, you know, the Chinese had an incident of the swine flu about 3 years ago, and they had to kill off about 50% or more of their pork pig farming. And so as a result, in order to grow that back, they've halted all export of phosphate fertilizer. They're one of the larger producers of phosphates. The Russians produce one of the other three fertilizer classes out of their natural gas, a nitrogen fertilizer. Basically what's happening this year is none of the African countries, none of the developing countries in South Asia are getting the adequate fertilizer they need. And so we're looking next year potentially global starvation in many parts of the world. What does that do to supply chains, to countries that start to become desperate, you know, for answers and probably take it out on their leadership? We may see some significant geopolitical disasters in the next couple of years. Could change the dynamics for a project like this, or, you know, one way or another.
Very interesting. No, I've got it.
So I guess I'll say there's another effort I think Alaskans might be aware of. We recently lost a scholar in Hawaii named Lee J. Cho, and he was the head of something called the Northeast Asia Economic Forum, and has been picked up again by leaders of the East-West Center. Governor Steve Cooper was head of the Northeast Asia Economic Forum, and I had the honor of being a member for on and off for the last 25, 30 years. It is, in essence, a group of US, Japanese, Korean, Chinese, Singaporean economic leaders and folks like me who can shine my shoes and not do much else. But the point was planning for significant infrastructure investment in a far more market-oriented North Korea, China, and Russia, to see how we might cooperate in filling out the gaps. And it's a group that has informed governments now for many years about infrastructure where we do have free markets and that sort of thing, and quite a bit of briefings on what kind of investments Japan and Korea especially were making in Russia and China. And even after we took ourselves out after Crimea. I'm not saying we shouldn't have taken ourselves out, but it was kind of hard to watch our Asian friends in there when we were not in there. And there's an understanding that there will come a time, that the rational time is be rational about transportation, and it is that short string that George Kamal brings with him in the globe. Be rational about air transportation, and it is that short string that means overflights of Russia. But gosh, we've got to figure out what kind of incentives are possible to avoid. Literally, I can't describe the situation anything more than organized crime. We have organized crime syndicates, other places in the world that condone violence. that promote violence to grab wealth. And that's what we have with a whole country that is led by criminals. And you know, what kind of incentives can we help the citizens have so they get past that corruption? And corruption and governments have gone hand in hand since there ever were governments. The tax collectors were known as the most corrupt in the Bible. But the fact is that there's got to be incentives to be back part of the family of nations. So I pray for that.
That's a very good point. Do we have any questions from the audience?
Wow, we've managed to drive away almost everyone.
No, this is really good. Yeah, you sir. You sir.
I'll be the resident skeptic here. My name's David Ramsher, and
David, you should be up here too.
Mead and Joe Henri know I've been following Alaska-Russia relations for about 30 years, and this has always struck me as among the more wacky projects that have sort of arisen during this period. They remind me of the other big dreamy projects that we Alaskans like to get excited about: gas lines, grain terminals, dome cities that we spend a lot of time and money on and that don't go anywhere. I thought the film was pretty compelling. It's a good story, but I thought it was pretty light on any sort of economic analysis of this project. I didn't see any mention of the enormous cost on both sides of the strait, of what it would cost to connect, and what would justify having a railroad like this, what would come back and forth. And I just wondered if Rick wanted to respond to that.
Yeah, the economic analysis, that's what the governor of Yakutsk also points out, that wants to see that economic analysis. There are a lot of numbers floating around. It'd be $100 billion approximately to build the whole thing. The real number crunching has been done only on the Russian side, as far as I know, but that was with Victor Razbegin and his institute in 1995, so you can imagine that those numbers are kind of outdated, plus they were only for the Russian side of things. It's been sort of a situation where the guys have done some kind of rough estimates, but there hasn't been any funding to do a proper feasibility study or anything. So I decided at some point consciously to focus the story more on the people who were trying to make this happen and the experiences they were having, the interactions with the local people along the way, rather than doing sort of a hard analysis of the actual railway itself. So I took into account that I know that some people will see that as lacking in the film, but it's not a mega engineering film. It's not a it's just it's not in the film.
I saw it as even just like a character study. It's a story about somebody who's very committed to an idea and follows it as far as he can, both financially, personally, and then professionally. And so it was a really compelling story about big ideas and what potentially it takes to just get those, that snowball to, gain momentum into an avalanche, right? What kind of other stories are you working on as a filmmaker? What's next for you?
What else am I working on? Thank you. It is. I decided very much to do this kind of a character story because that's sort of the types of films I make. Joe would have had a bigger role in the film if he had been able to go to Bering Strait with us. Instead, we have Scott, who was active in the 90s when this started off, but then he, raised a family and had his career and whatever else, and he just kind of got reactivated when it came time to do this trip. And then if I had known Mead at that time, if I'd known him better, maybe he would have become a more prominent person. We also filmed a little with him, but didn't make it in the film like with Brian. You guys could have become Strait Guys in another version.
I'm very happy to be on the cutting room floor.
But what else? I have to say that I've been making films for nearly 30 years now as an independent filmmaker, which means I don't get paid a salary. I am always looking for money to make films, and this was funded by German taxpayer money and by German, Finnish, and Canadian television, public television. So taxpayer money everywhere, public money. This project, my experience has been that one film kind of leads to the next. So this project, spending all this time in Alaska, kind of led to a story that I shot on the North Slope last summer. I was there with 4 atmospheric scientists from Colorado State University who were doing field work about the effects of thawing permafrost on cloud formation and on weather patterns. It's my first science film. They had a lot of money from the National Science Foundation, and basically I was an embedded filmmaker. I lived with them for 5 weeks in Utqiagvik and had the time of my life riding around on ATVs and freezing my ass off and seeing polar bears and filming scientists setting up their funny little machines and taking measurements and trying to understand what climate change is. So it's really like a film that I'm not very far along with the editing process yet. I'm still trying to fundraise for it, but it's really kind of showing an inside view of how scientists work. Because we read a lot about climate change, but at least I haven't seen a whole lot about who are these people who are doing this work, where are these numbers coming from and stuff, and that's what I'm showing in that film. And then I was in Africa, in Central Africa and Cameroon in January. I was hired as a cameraman to film a story about chickens. There's a new breed called a dual-purpose chicken that's been bred in Germany now, and there's a pilot project in Cameroon, and it's to empower local farmers. It's a special kind of, they can breed their own chickens, which normally isn't possible. You have to buy eggs or chicks from the big global companies. This is a special kind of chickens. They can lay eggs and they get fat and you can eat them. So they're perfect for these small farmers in rural areas like where we were in Cameroon. And the other film I've been working on the last 5 years is about a Jewish tailor in New York who survived the Holocaust and came to the US and became America's greatest tailor and makes suits for all the American presidents and lots of movie stars and stuff. And he's 93 years old now, Martin Greenfield. That's been a very inspiring story because I live in Germany and I've always thought that a Holocaust story would kind of come to me someday, and this one was offered to me 5 years ago. And we had a half-hour version that was on German TV a few years ago, and then we've been raising money to keep filming. So now his grandson is about to join the company as the 3rd generation of Greenfields, and we're going to follow the story for another year and roll that out. So
Oh, that sounds fabulous.
I got lots of things going on, and when I'm not doing that, I'm raising my 5 kids in Berlin, and I have a great profession. I've just been I've had luck that I've been able to follow my interests and find enough people to support what I do to sort of eke out a living, and I just have been lucky that I meet amazing people everywhere I go. Alaska's been a really good place for me, actually.
I want to congratulate you on this film. It's definitely a major feat in storytelling because there's a lot that's going into this film. But I'm glad that you have a variety of interests on the docket, but also, not gonna lie, I hope that we see your Arctic, temperature.
It's the big thaw is the working
I
title.
hope that we see that in the next iteration of the North by North Festival, which again is celebrating Northern culture and ideas and innovations. Now, as I want to be respectful of all of our time on a sunny Saturday afternoon, and kind of bring this to a close, do any of you have any final comments about, grand ideas or Alaska's moving forward? Or the film?
Well, first off, David just left, and I will say that I've been associated with gas lines, railroads, probably Polestar at the point when Earl Hines was talking about that. But I've also been associated with developing hydro projects across the state, developing roads across the state, bridges across the state, ports across the state. Frank Davidson, who got the Channel Tunnel going, went out and did a little bit of drilling so that the biggest technical question on the Channel Tunnel, it helped that his in-laws had started Schlumberger. so he had the drilling equipment. But he actually kind of cleared away the baffles in people's minds to be able to make the Channel Tunnel happen. The New York to Paris telegraph that brought up people here named Kennicott and people in Russia named Kennan and so forth was a large project that failed pretty much along the same route with this railroad. But out of it we got huge biology, we got a huge copper mine, we got the exposure of Russia's Gulag system under the Tsars, and the first cannon was there, not to speak of a fun piece of northern literature called Roughing, or kind of like Mark Twain's Roughing It, called Tent Life in Siberia. And I am not embarrassed in the least to be attached to a project that says, why can't we try something like this? And I'm not really attached to this project except that I've been a fan and a supporter of the concept of having the discussion. And if you read Rasbagin's 10 volumes on possible economics of this, it's actually very interesting. It says, you know, it tells you what the potential is of the land that we cross. If you, you know, Brian, I keep calling you out, but I mean, I've known your dad since the late 70s and known you not much a shorter time than that. And the point of it is, somebody put on my desk the other day some of the original blueprints from the North Commission, where he was the director of the North Commission, and the route of the railroad going west from Nenana and what he had commissioned there. And there will be transportation that will head west. It may be different. It may be tunnels. It may be rail with maglev. It may be drone routes. I don't know. All I know is that what you've had with George Kamal is the testing in a generation of, can we do this? And we can go find people like the first governor of, territorial governor of Colorado who tested it, of Harriman who tested it, of others who tested it. And I'm not going to say the test has failed. I'm going to say the test has said, yeah, there's still something to it.
Could I interject something very briefly, and that's about George Kumall. He mentioned, well, everybody's mentioned George, but he really is the father of this, modern father of this concept of a trade through the Bering Strait. And what I wanted to bring up here now in tribute to his mother is that he always said, often said, that his mother's geography book that he would study from time to time featured the Bering Strait, and somehow he got from that what could happen in the Bering Strait. And George Kumall has been a marvelous human being for that reason.
Yeah, and yeah, huge tribute to both of you, George, and to you as well, for persevering and pushing this project. And as Mead said, you know, there is no reticence on my part to be called a friend of this project either, because big dreams are required to get big things. And maybe it was Kennedy that, I think it was Kennedy, of course, that said, you know, we choose to go to the moon not because it's easy, but because it's hard. And that's what, you know, that's part of the spirit of being an Alaskan. You know, in order to do anything, we have to put ourselves out and take risks and believe in something for the greater good of all of us. And I think this kind of project encapsulates that a lot. And congratulations on all that you guys have done.
We're gonna do it, Rick.
Yeah, I maybe I'm naive, but I think it's going to happen someday. I think it's just going to become at some point it'll be like an economic no-brainer, the way that the world is developing. And in the meantime, we need to work on diplomacy to solve this problem that's going on. over west of here.
Well, thank you all for being a part of this conversation. I really can't thank you enough. And on behalf of the Anchorage Museum and our North by North Festival, we thank you so much for being a part of it and for enhancing this film with your thoughtful conversation. So thank you so much. And Rick, I hope you have a great journey back and that this isn't the last we hear from you.
Yeah.
All right. Maybe we'll take the train together. Thank you all so much. I mean, it's a very interesting timing and a very big weekend, but man, what a great day.
You're excellent.
Oh, well, you can go back anytime.